We are the Chicago Creative Coalition. I'm Linda Levy, and I'm so thrilled to be part of this Passion and Purpose track and artist speaker series. When artists create work about things that they care about, they make better art. This series aims to explore all the ways that passion projects emerge, evolve, develop, are supported, funded, and deployed. I'm so thrilled that our guest tonight is Anne Krause. Ever take a job when there was no job site? Anne Krause did. Originally from Aurora, Illinois, Anne has been in San Antonio, Texas for 17 years. She is the president and executive director of the Hemisfair Conservancy, an agency she co-founded in 2014. Anne and C3's newly appointed board member, Alicia Dale, met while on a mutual consulting assignment at a large financial services company and struck up a fast friendship. Anne is passionate about art, education, and community. She is married to Paul. Together they have 4 children and recently added another member to their family in 2018 by becoming foster parents. Anne began her career as an Air Force officer, had the privilege of flying jets, deployed to Cuba as the officer in charge of linguist operations, and served as the executive officer for the USAF Thunderbirds demonstration team. Please welcome Anne.
Thank you all so much for having me, and thank you so much for taping this so that others who couldn't join us tonight will be able to learn more about the redevelopment of Hemisfair. And so I'll begin by saying that Hemisfair is the name of the World's Fair in 1968 that San Antonio hosted. And prior to the World's Fair, there was a myth that San Antonio was a dusty little cow town. Boy, did we change minds when we brought 6 million people to San Antonio between April and October of 1968 and demonstrated that San Antonio really was a unique and up-and-coming city. One of the problems, though, is that when cities host the Olympics or other big expos like this, usually tremendous inertia had to be overcome just to pull off the event. And very typically, there weren't any good ideas, or if there were good ideas, there was no funding to decide what to do with the area afterward. And so sustainability became a problem. So for over 40 years, the site of 1968's World Fair languished and fell into disrepair. And boy, are we lucky, though, that there was a visionary mayor that in 2009 put together a task force and asked, what can be done with this area in the heart of San Antonio that will make our city a better place to work, live, and play? And that's when the redevelopment of Hemisfair began. Before the fair, there were 2,000 residents living in that section of San Antonio, and they had to leave their homes, their churches, their businesses, their synagogues for eminent domain for the fair. And that was very difficult. And there were a lot of hurt feelings, as you can imagine. But thankfully, because of the thoughtfulness of the redevelopment that's going on right now, some of those bridges are being repaired and people are excited about Hemisfair once again. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history and where we're going with this amazing project. Now, I know there are people who are with us tonight that actually attended the World's Fair in 1968. And so I do enjoy putting photos up to help bring some of those memories back to life with the monorail and the short skirts and the go-go boots that the hostesses would wear. One of my favorite stories in talking to people who actually attended the fair was hearing the stories of inspiration. There is a man that I met, he was 8 years old, and he went to the IBM pavilion where he was shown futuristic camera phones that we all possess right now. But back in '68, it was just a dream of what could be. His family didn't have a lot of money and no one had been educated before, but he says to this day that because of seeing the wonder of those futuristic ideas that were demonstrated and mocked up in Hemisfair '68, he was motivated and he worked very hard in school all the way to the point that he got a scholarship to Harvard. And he attributes that success to the inspiration he received in 1968. And I think that's really special. It also really put San Antonio on the map as a great tourist destination. Well, the problem is that when you focus on tourists, sometimes you forget about the locals. So in 2009, when the idea was coming together to redevelop this site into something transformational for San Antonio, the idea was to do it for the locals and by the locals. And I'm going to tell you more about how we're engaging the community in the process. So for those of you who are familiar with San Antonio, I just wanted to show you an aerial map of our rough borders, if you will. And this area in the top right here is where the San Antonio Convention stands. And so that is not in our purview, but it's definitely a neighbor that we're very interested in because there's going to be a lot of synergy between the convention center and Hemisfair. Hemisfair is going to be comprised of three uniquely themed parks, and I'm going to describe them each a little bit. But for your perspective, I just want to show that those three park areas combined comprise 40 acres of what we're calling an urban parks district. Back in the day, after the fair doors closed, they called Hemisfair Park. And when we began redeveloping it, we realized that we just wanted to call it Hemisfair because it truly is more than a park. People don't just play there, they also work and live there. Therefore, it is an urban parks district. And for those of you who are familiar with the very charming downtown San Antonio, you will see the San Antonio River being mapped out here, and you see that it actually has connectivity with one of the parks at Hemisfair. And about a block and a half north of Hemisfair, you'll find the Alamo. So for anyone who's coming to visit downtown San Antonio, you'll see like what a center city asset this truly is. We opened our first park, Yanaguana Garden, in 2015, October of 2015, and we are on the verge of welcoming our 3 millionth visitor next month. That makes us the second busiest park per acre in the state of Texas. The design theme for Yanaguana Garden is play from pre-K to gray. It really is an engaging, vibrant space, and I'll show you pictures of it, but it's designed to engage the smallest of toddlers all the way up to their great grandparents, so that if you want to do something, all you have to do is go down to Hemisfair and you'll find something. And it's beautiful and it's culturally relevant, very colorful. I hope you'll come see me so I can give you a tour. The second phase will be our flagship. That's called the Civic Park, a very different look and feel, and I'll share some renderings with you. We're going to begin construction on that this fall. It'll take about 2 years to complete. And so while we're building the Civic Park, we are going to be finalizing the conceptual design for Tower Park. And these are all working names, but just for your reference, the tower that we mentioned in the park's name is actually because it's at the base of the tower, the iconic structure that was built for the 1968 World's Fair and still stands today. So this is truly our aspirational vision. And I think this slide is important to me because I had the good fortune of attending an executive education course at Harvard Business School a couple years ago that focused on strategic perspectives and nonprofit management. And one of the things that they stress to us is that so oftentimes when you're running a nonprofit, you get very bogged down in the operational day-to-day details. And that is so true. If our splash pad, which is pictured here, is down, we get negative Facebook ratings because people are disappointed, and that can distract your attention very easily, as well as any number of things that happen in the park space. But at the end of the day, what really, really gets us on the horse every single day is the fact that we share this aspirational vision to create one of the world's great public places. We are inspired by 36 different parks that we benchmark throughout the country. Millennium Park in Chicago being one of them, Bryant Park in New York City, Discovery Green in Houston, Clyde Warren in Dallas. We are not the first group to try to put together an amazing urban park. But one of the things we know is that great cities have great downtowns, and great downtowns have great urban spaces where people come together. And that's exactly what we want to create, is a place in the heart of San Antonio that draws the entire community together. Here are some photos that give you a little bit of a look and feel for what Yanaguana Garden looks like. As you'll see, it is very colorful, and that is very culturally relevant to us. The area where Hemisfair was built was actually a melting pot itself. And I'm going to show you some pictures of a house that was built by an Italian family, purchased by a German family across the street from an Irish family. And we had Native Americans here and people of Spanish and other Hispanic descent, all coming together in San Antonio. And so we wanted to make it very colorful to kind of tie into Fiesta, which is our big event that we have every April. And it's a very vibrant space. And something I promised C3 I would do is tell a story that normally you have to come to San Antonio to hear. People ask, how did you name it Yanaguana Garden? And actually my teammate and I came up with that name. And Yanaguana means spirit waters in the Payaya Indian language. And the Payaya Indians were here in this area long before we were. And so we wanted to honor that connection. And the Payaya Indians have an oral history, if you will. So we're not allowed to put it on a sign. And so I only share it verbally. And if you come back to the park, you'll see this for yourself. But they have a legend, and we wanted to depict it with local art. So we had a mosaic artist. We shared the legend with him, and then he depicted the story in 3 different art installations. So I'll begin by saying that there was a blue hole, and the blue hole is kind of like the headwaters of a river. And you can see that here. And you can also see from the colors and the patterns that our local artist, Oscar Alvarado, was very influenced by Gaudi, whose amazing work you can see in Barcelona, as well as the fashion designer, Emilio Pucci. So here we have the blue hole. Next, we have the anhinga bird, also known as a turkey cormorant. And this turkey cormorant came to get water at the blue hole. And as it was sipping its water and dipping its wings in, it was surprised by a panther azul. So this blue panther was guarding the spirit waters, and he leapt out of the blue hole and chased the anhinga bird away. And as the bird was making its escape, the water droplets fell from its wings. And when the water droplets made contact with the ground, that's what the Payaya Indians thought is how creation came about. So that is their legend depicted in a 3-part art installation that we're very proud of. This is an Instagrammable moment. Many children like to climb on this. All of our public art is interactive and meant to be climbed on and photographed. And someday I would like to see this on the cover of Texas Monthly. So as I mentioned before, Hemisfair really is a place where people work, live, and play. And one of the first examples of the living aspect is this public-private partnership, which is a 151-unit apartment complex built by one of our partners. And I'll get back to saying that these public-private partnerships, we'll call those P3s for short, are very important to Hemisfair because we are already out of the city's general operating budget, and only 20% of the total footprint of the plan has come to fruition. So we need to come up with multiple revenue streams to make sure we have enough not only to build the park, but to maintain it, activate it, and sustain it for generations. That was one of the problems back in 1968. Sustainability wasn't really a concept people worried about much. They were focused on the here and now. And then not a lot of thought or funds were available afterward to come up with a good plan. So that's the whole point of the P3s, is an ongoing revenue stream. So the 40-acre urban parks district that is becoming Hemisfair is really, I can break it down into 3 chunks for you, not just the park piece, but in terms of acreage. We'll have 19 acres of green space, 16 acres of developable parcels where these P3s can go along the edges of the park. And then the remaining 5 acres are for streets and right-of-ways. And I'll tell you a little bit more about this P3 because it's special and it's setting a really interesting trend. One of the issues that San Antonio is facing is that there's not a lot of affordable housing. And so we developed a workforce housing plan, and that states that between 10 and 50% of all residential units going into Hemisfair must be affordable for people who are making between 50 and 110% of area median income. And now I know in every city it's different. In San Antonio, for a family of 4, that area median income is $77,000. If this were market rate, no one who made anywhere close to AMI would be able to afford to live there. And therefore, the developer receives some tax credits so that he can afford that sliding scale. And we're able to attract a very nice mix of San Antonians who can afford to live there, whether they be nurses or teachers or other workers in the nearby area. It's great that we're able to get this vibrant mix of San Antonio residents living, working, and playing at Hemisfair. The beauty of this is that the developer then gives a percentage of his lease revenues to Hemisfair as part of our long-range financial self-sustainability plan. I think I mentioned before about the eminent domain, and if I forgot to mention it, I should restate that 2,000 residents were displaced for the fair in '68, and our plan is to build enough residential units to bring those 2,000 residents back to the area. And that really helps with the vibrancy in the central business district of San Antonio, our urban core. So to the north of Yanaguana Garden will be our flagship, the future Civic Park. And what you're looking at here is a 14-acre parcel. And that's where the former western wing of the San Antonio Convention Center used to stand. And back in 2009, that was part of the big idea that that visionary mayor had. He said, what can we do with the space that used to be the World's Fair? And while we're at it, let's take a look at our neighbor, the convention center, because it's losing top tier business. And so the big idea was synergistic in many ways. The decision was made to improve and expand the convention center and expand it to the east. And in so doing, they made way to deconstruct the western wing, which had become obsolete. And at the same time as improving the convention center, they then were able to make more parkland to expand and improve the parks at Hemisfair. So this is the one that we're going to begin construction on this fall. I cannot wait to get out there. It's going to be amazing. So I want to show you some renderings. The woman who designed Yanaguana Garden is the late Susan Goldsman. And we hired her because she had so many incredible gifts to share. And one of them was that she wrote the American Disabilities Act for urban parks in the United States. And so Yanaguana Garden is an incredibly accessible and inclusive park. We have engineered mulch so that wheelchair wheels don't get stuck in it. We have special swings that people who are normally confined to wheelchairs can get vestibular stimulation in. It is just a place that is very welcoming for people of all ages, abilities, socioeconomic levels, and ability level. The person we hired to then design the Civic Park, we wanted a different look and feel, but still wanted it to be accessible and inclusive. And the woman who designed the Civic Park, her name is Catherine Gustafson, and she's the principal of GGN, and they're based in Seattle, Washington. And I wasn't familiar with GGN before I was working at Hemisfair, but I was familiar with their work, and some of you may be too. It was Catherine Gustafson and her firm GGN that designed the amazing Lurie Garden at Millennium Park in Chicago. She also designed the Princess Di Memorial at Hyde Park in London. People go to that area and they cry because it is so beautiful and it stirs up emotions. She has an incredible gift and her team is also amazing. They came and spent a lot of time in San Antonio at different times of the year to get to know our residents and what we were looking for in park spaces. And as a matter of fact, we do that for all 3 parks before we venture into design. We do a lot of public workshops to make sure that all of the stakeholders representing different groups in San Antonio have their thoughts and wishes represented. And the reason for that is we are using public funds. We receive bond funds to help build these parks. Bond funds alone are not enough, but they are a significant part to enable us to build these 3 parks. So during the public park visioning process with the community, what we heard over and over again was that the city wanted a place to gather. We have nowhere to gather. When the San Antonio Spurs win a championship, people get in their cars, drive up and down the main thoroughfares, and they bang their pots and pans out their window. And that is just not a very sophisticated way to celebrate. And so the San Antonians wanted a place they could get together. The Civic Park is going to give them that spot. This 2-acre lawn within the Civic Park will be able to hold 10 to 15,000 people for a concert. What you're seeing here also is that they're along this edge right here. That is called a zocalo, which is inspired by the hardscapes in Central and South America in the plazas and courtyards there. And on a regular day, we can have restaurant tables and chairs there, and people can sit and have their lunch and visit and do whatever they do. But the best thing is that it also has the ability to be used as a stage for a concert. And that was one of the things that came about in the public workshop, as well as having a place to gather. They wanted a place to have concerts, but they didn't want a permanent amphitheater, but they wanted the flexibility. And that's what this design does. So there are enough electrical outlets. There are places for a semi truck to come up and unload for all of the sound equipment if we are going to put on a big stage concert. So it does have that flexibility. So in addition to those two things, the San Antonio community also said, we want shade and we want water, or we're not coming, and we're certainly not coming 12 months a year. Because those of you who've been to San Antonio know that in the summertime, it is very hot and sticky here, and it's a lot better when you're standing in the shade or you can get your feet wet. So this is an interior view of the park looking back toward that Zocalo area that can be used as a stage. We have a beautiful tree-lined promenade that it will be reminiscent of parks you might have visited in Paris or other great cities. It's going to be a wide promenade that has tall sycamore trees on either side that the light can dapple through the leaves. And then along the length of the promenade that runs the length of the park, there will be a very shallow channel. And that shallow channel is going to have water manipulated throughout the day to mimic the historic acequias that the Spaniards used to use to water their crops. It's part of San Antonio's water story. And just like at Yanaguana Garden, where the kids can learn its cognitive development through play, people are going to learn a little bit about the water story of San Antonio through experience. And at the very southern edge of the park, there are going to be some beautiful gardens that we're adding. And this is made possible by our first 7-figure gift that we received at the end of last year. And our market is very different from the Chicago market. My friends at Millennium Park tell me about all of the 7-figure gifts they got with Oprah's help to help build Millennium Park. We are not as fortunate. We are more of a middle market. And so this 7-figure gift was really pivotal for us because it demonstrated to other funders maybe sitting on the sidelines that our organization had been vetted and this very well-known family trusted and invested in us. And the matriarch of that family passed away in November. And so they are going to name these exquisite gardens after her. They are under design by GGN, and we hope to begin construction on those this fall as well. So meanwhile, while construction on the Civic Park is going to get going, we are going to complete the conceptual design for Tower Park. We've had such good success with GGN that we actually hired them to do the design work at Tower Park as well. They really get what we're going for. They're very amenable to all of the inputs they get from public workshops. And so they're contemplating ideas more along the lines of a community park. So we have play, we have wide open spaces, and now we'll have perhaps a dog run with a brewery component, maybe a climbing tower as something to attract teenagers. And then we have a long line of historic homes in need of rehabilitation. And we're hopeful that at Tower Park, we'll be able to have a series of small businesses operating out of those rehabilitated historic homes. So my job, I'll a little bit of the timeline. So 2009 is when this visioning process for what Hemisfair could be began. In 2011, the San Antonio City Council stood up the agency we know as the Hemisfair Park Area Redevelopment Corporation. That is a mouthful, so we're going to call that HPark. And HPark was founded as a local government corporation. The mayor appoints its board members, and city council approves them. And so there's a lot of interface with the city. And so 2011, I mentioned, is when that really began in full force with a small staff. And in 2013, it became readily apparent to the wonderful people who began this whole project. It dawned on them that that was when it was really obvious that the public funds were not going to be enough to achieve this aspirational vision. And so I was hired in 2014 to set up a separate 501c3 charitable organization to raise the philanthropic dollars to truly take the parks at Hemisfair from good to great. And so when I was hired, I assumed that I would be raising money for park construction. That was obvious to me. But there are a lot of other layers of what we do, and I want to show you some of those layers through pictures. This is another rendering of the Civic Park on the southern side. This is an area we're calling the Shallows, and that promenade with the water feature I mentioned, that water feature is going to drain into 5 limestone pools where people again can wade and get their feet wet, not necessarily swim. We have a splash pad for little kids at Yanaguana Garden, but this will be for older people and people who don't want quite the rambunctious nature of the Union Pacific Railroad splash pad at Yanaguana Garden. But I like to show this picture because it also shows some of the things that we're adding to the park. Because as you saw from that picture where the western wing of the convention center used to stand, that is a scraped area. And as you can see from this depiction, we're going to add a lot of trees. We are going to add actually over 200 trees to that 9-acre parcel. So we mean business. When the San Antonio community said they wanted shade and water, this is how we're going to give it to them. So I want to touch a little bit on historic preservation because that's a very important part of our work as well. As I mentioned, there were people who left their homes for eminent domain for the fair. 21 historic structures are still standing. This one is the Longini Herman House. A hat maker by the last name of Longini built this house, and then he sold it to the Herman family, and they were German, and they remained in the house remained in their family until they deeded it to the city for the World's Fair. And I know the man whose grandparents lived in this house, and he remembers going to Easter and Christmas celebrations with them. And so you can imagine the heartache the family experienced when after the fair, they boarded up the doors and windows, and that was the end of it, and it fell into demolition by neglect. So during the World's Fair, this was actually used as a restaurant, but because there was no plan afterward in October of 1968, that's why it fell into such disrepair. So when I came to the team in 2014, the only things living in this house were squatters and feral cat colonies. And we knew we had to do something about this and make it better. So with bond dollars, what we did is we stabilized the exteriors of the homes. So where there were holes in the roof, we patched them. Where there were cracked doors and windows, we repaired those as well. But that was it. The bond dollars were exhausted doing the exterior work. And so one by one, with philanthropic investment, we bring the interiors up to code. And after we bring it up to code, we put out a request for interest, and we try to attract a small local business, one that will serve park visitors. So we have a lot of restaurant and retail, things that will enhance a park visitor's stay and enable them to stay longer if perhaps they didn't think ahead and pack a picnic lunch. And what makes this a virtuous cycle is that we then charge that small business a single-digit percentage of their gross monthly revenues as their rent. That's their lease payment. And then we reinvest it in the park. Well, the pandemic was a really interesting test time for this because, as you can imagine, during a pandemic, yes, there were people coming to the park for respite and to get a little time in nature, but they certainly weren't gathering, and they weren't going to the pizzeria that was our most popular restaurant prior to the pandemic. Because of our interesting and unique rent and lease strategy, these businesses did not have to go bankrupt. So they had to shutter for a while. And yes, that hurt Hemisfair in terms of the fact we weren't getting any lease revenues. But the nice thing is when business was starting to pick back up as San Antonio opened up, they get to get back in business and serve park visitors and generate long-term lease revenue that's reinvested at Hemisfair. So we're really pleased about that virtuous cycle that's great for small business. As a matter of fact, that's how we get some of our big gifts for historic preservation. A lot of people are interested in historic preservation, but when I tell them that this Longini Herman house costs 1.4 million to bring the interior up to code, that's a lot of money, and just for historic preservation's sake. But when corporations hear that we are actually making these small business opportunities, that's when they get very excited. So a couple years ago, Bank of America gave us their first anchor grant, which is a major, major gift. They made their first anchor grant in the state of Texas, and they did it at Hemisfair. And the reason they did it is they wanted to help us bring one of these houses, give it a new lease on life, and give a small business opportunity to an entrepreneur who might not otherwise be able to afford rent so close to the Alamo and the convention center and the Riverwalk. And we're able to do that with their help. Here's a view of from the interior of the Longini Herman House, and you can see how great the millwork was. And in its day, it was really a thing of beauty. And while we're not able to restore it to its original standards, we are able to bring it up to code and make it a nice place for a business to operate. This is the Tynan Sweeney house that was purchased by an Irish family. And in the back corner here, the tall gentleman you see is Josh Davis. For any of you who are Olympic fans, he was a gold medal swimmer for our USA swim team. And he is a descendant of the Tynans and Sweeneys. And this is a group of the descendants who got together at the house for part of their family reunion. And they're very excited that this house that their great grandparents lived in is coming back to life. Next, we do some environmental initiatives at Hemisfair that we're really proud of too. As I mentioned, we are adding 200 trees to Civic Park, and those trees are going to be roughly 6 caliper inches, different varieties, things that are native to San Antonio, and they will provide shade upon planting, but they're not going to be giant trees, at least not for a while. We had an amazing opportunity to transplant 31 mature trees like this one that were going to be cut down due to other development projects in the vicinity. And when we got wind of that, we said, we want to save those trees. For the developers, it is cheaper to cut down a large tree like this that's in the way and pay a mitigation fee to the city than it costs to transplant them. And so I call it a feat of engineering and philanthropy. We saved these 31 humongous legacy trees and we gave them a new home at Hemisfair. And after years, I'm pleased to tell you that 29 of them have survived, and that's a very good percentage. This beauty right here weighed over 100,000 pounds, and that root ball was over 6 feet tall. And now that beautiful tree is going to provide shade for more generations of park visitors. Hemisfair is also home to 3 pollinator gardens, and we'll be adding more. We read an interesting study a few years ago. They said the #1 thing that someone in an urban setting can do to impact the global food supply is to plant pollinator gardens in downtown areas so that the bees and the hummingbirds and the butterflies have a place to stop as they're making their way other places and to help pollinate these other plants. And I met someone the other day that said 1 out of every 3 bites you take is made possible by a pollinator. So we're very glad to add some pollinator attraction here at the park. It's also a great educational piece where we have signage out, and little kiddos who come can learn about caterpillars and the foods they like to eat and the kind of butterflies they become. And I'm very proud of my youngest son. One of his Eagle Scout project was to plan and coordinate and plant one of these pollinator gardens. And last but not least, one of the things that the Conservancy raises funds for is community programming. And that is to make sure that everyone, no matter what their socioeconomic status is, that they can afford to come spend a day at Hemisfair and take advantage of everything we offer. In 2019, so I want to give you some pre-pandemic numbers, we did over 600 events and we had over 650,000 people at Yanaguana Garden. We're not on track to resume that level of events just yet. We're kind of emerging from that, but slowly but surely we're beginning to gather again. And we have health and wellness, gardening, chess, you name it. We try to do a variety of different things to attract a whole bunch of different people of different age groups and different interests to make sure that we're serving everyone. We have a story time program, and at the end of the story time program, the children are then exposed to a science, technology, engineering, art, and math activity that reinforces the story. And during the pandemic, We heard from so many people who said they really missed that. We began doing it on a virtual platform, and then we took it one level higher and we began taping it and piping it into Methodist Children's Hospital and delivering the supplies there for the activities as well, so that the kiddos in the Children's Hospital could partake in story time at Hemisfair, with the hopes that when they get out of the hospital, they can come back down to the park and do it in person. This is just some of our fun donor recognition, but I want to get to my favorite program. So this picture is one of my partners. Her name is Tracy. She's our director of events. And those are her children, Stella and Mason. And Mason, her little guy, has a long list of special needs. And Tracy, as a mom, as well as being an events specialist, knows how important it is to create programs for people of all abilities to be able to partake in. And as I mentioned before, Susan Goldsman, the designer of Yanaguana Garden, wrote the American Disabilities Act standards for urban parks. And so that's why Yanaguana Garden is so thoughtfully designed. Well, you know what? You put a thoughtfully designed park out there, but people don't always know how intentional you are. And so we partnered with a bunch of nonprofit organizations in San Antonio serving the special needs community. And we got together and came up with inclusion programming. And what inclusion programming does is it offers layers of experience for people of all abilities, so that little guys like Mason can play alongside his typically developing peers. And that breaks down a lot of myths about what people with special needs are like and what they need. And it brings the community together in a very special way. And if it weren't for philanthropy, we wouldn't be able to make that happen. And it just makes us feel so good to know that kids like Mason are not in the corner somewhere waiting for something to engage them. It is designed for them and for their siblings and for their friends to come enjoy together. And also, due to this thoughtfulness, we have one of the only adult-sized changing tables in the city in a public space like this. And that's one of the things Tracy brings with her experience, is that just because you're not a kid anymore doesn't mean that you outgrow your special needs. And so many families have reached out to us saying, thank you so much for not making me have to change my teenager on a blanket in the parking lot. And it means a lot to us that because of people like Tracy, because of the nonprofit partners we are serving everyone in San Antonio. So I am thrilled to be able to tell you about Hemisfair, our art, our programming, our historic preservation, and our vision of what is to come. I am definitely putting my dibs in now. You are invited for your own personal tour the next time you're in San Antonio. And what I'd like to do is I would like to open it up for any questions anyone may have.
Can people hear me? I think so. If you have a question, you can just unmute yourself and ask it. You can put it in the chat and Linda will pass it over to Anne. However you'd like to do it. If you don't want to talk, it's up to you.
I have a question, Anne. How did you first encounter Hemisfair? How did Hemisfair come into your life? I just want to know your own origin story there.
Yeah,
Sure.
that's my question too.
I was the chair of development for the Southwest School of Art as a volunteer. And I had a wonderful committee member. Her name is Andy Rodriguez. And she pulled me aside once. She goes, I have this great idea. And I thought it was a fundraising idea for this organization we were serving. And she said, no. She said, my friend Andres Andujar is being hired to be the CEO of H Park. And he has an incredible vision. I want you to meet him because I think you might just be the person for the job that he wants to create. And I said, I'm not looking for a job. She goes, no, you got to meet him. So I went downtown and I sat down with Andres, and Andres basically laid out the sketches for what Yanaguana Garden could be. And oh my goodness, I got so excited because I realized that what Hemisfair is what Millennium Park, what Hemisfair could be is what Millennium Park was for Chicago. And I thought, what an amazing opportunity to get to make San Antonio, my new hometown, a better place to work, live, and play. And so, to be honest with you, I jumped at the chance and I'm so glad they hired me. I know I'm the right person for the job because 7 years later, I still love giving people tours. And I'm inspired by the laughter. I'm inspired by seeing families come together and people of all walks of life knowing it's for them.
Thank you. Wow.
No matter what sort of development experience you had before, this has to be, I mean, just magnitudes larger than anything you worked on. How did you
Yeah.
even think about approaching that?
Oh, that's a really good question. Okay, and this is funny because this harkens back to my interview experience. So there aren't many projects this size in San Antonio, and they definitely wanted to hire someone from the community. So thankfully, I had that going for me. But Andres, the CEO, he asked me in my interview process. He said, "Well, aren't you frightened about the amount of philanthropy that's required?" And I said, "Andres, frightening is flying 3 to 5 feet away from another aircraft going 300 knots. I am not frightened to be a matchmaker. I'm a matchmaker between people with philanthropic intent and an amazing mission. And I think it's insulting when you ask people for money just because they have it. I think the important thing is to find out who has an affinity for your project. And I think that's where the really important conversations, the meaningful relationships come into play. And then when you're respectful of that and you can connect people with the ability to do something really great for our city. And I'm a matchmaker for that. It's easy.
Yeah, I was wondering how flying planes relates to what you do now. It's
Yeah, nothing scares me. Philanthropists are just
I know,
people.
and not any kind of plane either. So
And then Michael, I want to answer your, I wasn't trying to be cavalier, but the truth is that running a nonprofit organization, there's an art and a science to it. And I had the nuts and bolts from all of the volunteering I had done. I had been a board chair, I had been a development chair, and I learned from a lot of great CEOs and executive directors doing what I'm doing today. And my husband, as a matter of fact, pulled me aside after one gig and told me if I ever did it again for free, he would kill me. And so I'm really glad that I'm doing it professionally. And so I'm using leadership and management skills that I developed in the Air Force. I'm using the nonprofit management skills that I learned as a volunteer at my church and in my community. And then I think I have good people sense and I hire amazing staff. So I'm really, really proud of my team. I have zero turnover, knock on wood. Everyone is very committed to this mission and seeing this vision through. And I think the rest is you have to create a plan and you have to execute a plan. Make no excuses for yourself. You've got to work.
well, it's beautiful. I was so amazed. I have to say, I don't think the write-up that we had for you did you justice.
I agree. We need a new writer. We'll get to
yeah.
work on that right away.
Yes, exactly. Because, on Monday and then today with your presentation, which thank you so much for being here. This is amazing. It's just really amazing.
Well, I would like to share that our CEO, Andres, he is an architectural engineer by training and had worked on some very large projects before. And one of the things that makes me so proud of him and the tone he has set is that there have been numerous times, because you can imagine all the interface he has with city management. And, every 2 years, the city, the different councils are able to hire a different council member. And so, you're not always dealing with the same set of people. We've had several mayors, we've had a couple city managers, and that's very complicated for these longitudinal projects to have that much change. And the thing I've seen about Andres is that he has never, ever sacrificed design, quality, or excellence in order to achieve some type of financial or political expediency. And sometimes, to his own demise. It is very complicated to be at the helm of this organization, going through the bond processes, and, a lot of other organizations and projects want to get funding too. And when you're getting funding, everyone wants a piece of yours. And so I think it's very important for Hemisfair, for people in the leadership positions to be talking about how important this is for the city, not just today, but for generations to come. This is a legacy that we're establishing for our city. And I think that helps us garner the type of support we need, but I'm not going to say it's easy, but I'm going to tell you it's worth it.
No, I mean, that's the other thing that impresses me about it is it's so collaborative and inclusive, and it's this really much bigger picture than just the park itself. So that was what I mean, I'm telling everybody about you. So, because I just thought it was really, really amazing. How did you pick the artists that were like the artists that did all the mosaic type things?
So yes, we worked in concert with Public Art San Antonio, and they get a percentage of, funding from the city. And one of the things, back to it being so culturally appropriate, to make sure that it doesn't look like we poached design from a park in Ohio and tried to plunk it down in the middle of San Antonio. One of the things that makes it uniquely San Antonio's is that all of the art is done by local artists. So we hired a local artist to be the curator. And that
Oh,
local artist, who's well known in the
Right.
community, coordinated with Public Art San Antonio, and he came up with the list and helped decide which artists' work of different mediums as well should be reflected at the park. And we're really pleased with the mix. Since most of you are from Chicago, I will share with you that I often get the hint, like, you guys need a bean. And yes, Cloudgate at Millennium Park is amazing, but it was about $26 million, I think, and worth every penny. I mean, what a great branding piece for the city. It's amazing. My daughter, every time we go there, she wants to go photograph it in different light conditions. It's very cool. But our budget right now would enable us to do a refried bean. And
You don't need a bean. You have an iguana. You have a panther. He's
Yeah.
spectacular.
But we do plan to incorporate some more significant public art at the Civic Park, but that will of course take significant funding, and we're kind of looking at this as one phase at a time.
I have another question. What was there anything that surprised you along the way in this journey? Like what, you seem so full of intent and energy to make your intentions come to life, but were there any like big obstacles that you had to overcome that you didn't anticipate?
Every day. No, I would say the biggest one is the historic preservation piece. While I think it is very special and it's very important to making Hemisphere everything that it is, that the price tag on the historic preservation is really high. And I'm very, very pleased to tell you that because of the success we have with Bank of America and other foundations that kind of understood what we were really trying to get at, we might be getting some significant federal funding this year. And if the Appropriations Committee approves it in the fall, that will be a significant bump for us. But, we started with a $5,000 grant. And, when you're looking at one of the houses being 1.4 million, you appreciate that $5,000, while very much appreciated, it's going to take a really long time to get this house up to code without more significant investment. And so we leveraged individual gifts and foundation gifts in order to get that corporate gift from Bank of America, which we then leveraged to get federal funding, we hope. So I think it's a story of you start small and you tell your story. And when someone gives you $5, you say thank you. And then you report back to them and say, this is what I did with your $5. And so that they become advocates and they say, these people mean what they say, and I trust them and I'm going to invest more. And that's kind of how we build our donor. That's how we build our donor base. And we have good retention. And I want to thank Alicia and my father-in-law, Chuck. Thank you for being donors. It really makes a difference when the community and friends and family add their names to our annual donor list, because every gift really does matter and we put it to excellent use at the park.
Cool.
And I was lucky enough to get a live tour, I think back in 2015, and it's wonderful to see how much has happened and grown. And I recall from the tour that when a small business comes to Hemisfair, they also make a commitment to give back in some way. What are some of the ways that they gave back? And then also, I think I heard you say that they were doing some creative things because of the pandemic. The businesses couldn't operate.
Yes. So from a programming perspective, we had a little place that was doing empanadas, and they said, well, we have a relationship with this musical group. So maybe once a month we would, instead of charging for it, we would have this musical group come and play for free on the deck. So they very much want to help support what's going on. in the community while they're making money, of course, too, but to be able to give something back. For a yoga instructor, yes, sometimes the yoga instructors want to charge for a class, but we say if you want to charge for a class, make sure that every once in a while you do one for free, and then we can put that out on social media so that anyone can come. Creatively, Dough Pizzeria, which is one of our tenants, they had to close during the pandemic, but they were able to do takeout. And then at one point they started just making dough for pickup and maybe purchase at a grocery store. So they were always trying to come up with new ways to continue to stay in business, even if they didn't have a brick and mortar location.
Wow. How do people donate?
Oh my gosh, I love you.
Let's
If
give
you
us
go to-
the
Way to
instruction.
go, Linda.
If you go to Hemisfair, that's Hemisfair, because sometimes people think it's hemisphere. I just wanted to be clear. Hemisfair.org. There is a donate button.
It's
And
right on the homepage,
that's right.
Great.
where it should be.
Every year we hang annual donor panels, and instead of doing an annual report or putting it on a website, we do it physically in the park because we think it's really compelling when you come up to these donor panels and you see the hundreds or thousands of names of people who have made contributions. And I'm going to
Nice.
tell you that people from $5 all the way up to the 7 figures are all listed in alphabetical order. We think
Nice.
that parks like this are the most amazing example of democratic small d spaces that you can find. And we want to be very welcoming and inclusive, again, saying that, hey, even if you don't have big money, your gift counts. And we think that's an important way to demonstrate our gratitude.
Thank you. We shall spread the word.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, definitely. I just have a question. So how did your leadership or how you approached leading a team of people, has that changed since you've taken this on?
No, but I will tell you that something really changed last year during the pandemic, and I'll just share that. Because I participated in that Harvard Business School class a couple years ago, they reached out to me last year and they said, would you be part of a pilot workshop we're doing on nonprofit crisis management? You know, a lot of us haven't gone through a pandemic and try to raise funds during that. And that did change my approach, and I'll tell you how. There was a very intense mission by Shackelford many years ago in the Arctic, and there were some lessons learned from that. And we talked about that during our class, but we did a spin on that when we were talking about crisis management.
Mhm.
And so there were 3 basic tenets, and I think they were very important. The first was you need to be brutally honest. You know, when things aren't going well, you have to convey the truth. And so during the pandemic, there was some worry among nonprofits, like, you know, when people are worried about their health, is it appropriate to be trying to raise funds for your project? And the answer is yes, but it's a lot in how you do it. And so we reached out to our donors and we said, these are the impacts of the pandemic. So the first thing is I told you about the revenue streams we have. So we lost parking revenues because people weren't coming because they were scared and they were staying home for a while. We lost the revenues from the small business tenants. And we also do a lot of like space rentals for large scale events. So we do Dia de los Muertos, we do Luminaria, we do Diwali, we do these large cultural events, and we're the kind of the host for it. And we receive rental revenue for that. And that all went by the wayside because we weren't allowed to have anything that encouraged gathering. So when you looked at all the different hits Hemisfair was taking to its budget, that was challenging. And H Park had to lay off all of their programming staff but one, just because we weren't having the programming volume to support that. And so we shared that with our donors, but the next step that we learned is that you also have to demonstrate empathy. So you have all these problems and you're brutally honest about them, but when you're watching the national news and the photos they use of food bank lines are shot in San Antonio. So, you know, yes, we're doing this amazing park project and people really realized during the pandemic that they needed parks, right? But at the same time, if there are people hungry down the street, you have to take that all into perspective. So we shared our crisis. We also said, but we understand these are also very intense needs going on in our community. Therefore, if you are able to support, would you please also give to us? And then the third piece of the advice we got and we implemented was pave the path forward. And that's exactly what we did. So we said, if you're able to support us, then these are the things we're going to do. And so during the pandemic, even though we couldn't do all that we typically did, we really, really focused on plans for construction this fall. We focused on future design of that third park, and we focused on fundraising. And because of that, we had an incredible year-end finish last year from a fundraising perspective. We have a fall projected date to break ground at Civic Park, and our design for Tower Park is well underway. And that's because we used the pause created by the pandemic to at least make progress in the ways that we could. And so those definitely shaped kind of my approach to fundraising during a very difficult time. And the pandemic also made me really aware, as it made everybody aware in their various businesses, that the crisis affected different people in different ways every day. And so one day everyone could be fine. The next day there could be something going on at home for someone, and you really had to pay more attention to your people than you ever did before. And I think that that focus on the people is something that we should always do all the time anyway. The pandemic made it really obvious how important that was. And I hope because it lasted so long that a lot of us will continue to do so more intentionally going forward.
Thanks. Yeah, I have 4 park districts, suburban park districts as clients. So it's been interesting watching how each one of them has maneuvered through this. And then I was just talking to another client. She's a dentist. She actually took the pandemic to expand her business, revise and get her team together where they're now a more cohesive team. And they all invested in this new planning of the business. So I thought that was interesting. So,
well, I have nonprofit peers who basically sat there, they were wringing their hands like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And you can feel sorry for yourself for about 2 seconds. And then you gotta pick a course of action and move this down the road. And my small team, we cranked out 110 grant submissions last year. And
my God,
that is more than our typical.
that is no small feat.
Holy cow.
You know what? That's what you had to do. I would watch these best practice videos and webinars, and they said 20% of nonprofits were going to likely fold as a result of the pandemic. And I'm pretty mission driven, and I'm like, we're not going to be one of those 20%. The project's too important.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, well, I can't wait to go to San Antonio again.
All right, come on down.
So again, thank you so much.
Awesome.
Mhm.
Well, I want to thank you very much for your interest. Thank you so much to those who attended tonight. Tell your friends, come on down and see me. I'll give you a red carpet tour. And I also want to thank anyone who's going to watch the link later. Thank you so much for your interest in the redevelopment of Hemisfair.
Mhm.
And if anyone has any other question, put it in the chat. Otherwise, we're going to go push that donate button real fast.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Excellent.
And congratulations.
It's stunning.
Yeah.
It's so stunning.
Yeah, you're so inspiring. So yeah, I'm inspired.
Thank you all.
Mhm.